Last couple of weeks ago, we started this series off and we talked about, there's three different areas that we need to consider. First of all, you got to realize that sometimes it's just time for a fresh start. You got to realize, you have to acknowledge that I need a start. I need to start over. And then accept the conditions of the start. Maybe the problem is I realize I need to start over because my own attitude's getting in my way. And okay, the situation might not change. And I have to accept that. You don't just start over only if the conditions change. That's not the way it works. And you have to trust God through the whole start over, the repositioning of yourself there. Principle 3 here. It says that we have to trust God through the start. It doesn't say that the restart is going to be without pain, or that it's going to be the way that we prefer it. Think about that. A person recently told me, said, right now in my life, I'm in a position where I'm kind of at a crossroads with a family situation. And it's a situation where tough love is needed, but also compassion. Also, it's filled with frustration, and yet I also see the need for mercy. Relationships can be difficult. And again, sometimes we need to start those over again, too. Well, what about when it comes to our relationship with God? What about that? Do we need to start that over again sometimes? Do we ever need to look back and say, Lord, the way I felt about things, or the way I pursued certain things in the past weren't quite right. So can we start this over again? I can't tell you how many times I've done that in my own spiritual journey. When it comes to our relationship with God, sometimes we have to accept the discipline that God gives to us, especially when we turn away from Him for any reason. I've shared with you before, what's God's plan here in the world? What's the whole point of this? It's redemption. That's why we're here. That's why we're going through this thing called life. It's so that we can be redeemed. Well, sometimes when we become disenchanted with the way God provides for us, sometimes He'll bring painful situations, painful discipline. We might call it tough love. And today we're going to take a look at a story from the book of Numbers. Anybody been in the book of Numbers recently? It's one of the... There we go. Well, book of Numbers is an Old Testament book back when the children of Israel, the nation of Israel, was wandering in the desert. And kind of give you a little bit of a scenario. They had come out of Egypt, and this was a very challenging and a difficult time. Let's take a look at it. And I'll put it up on the screen. The riffraff, or if you look at the original Greek word, Greek language, it was the people that were disgruntled with or unhappy with God. That's what it translates. The riffraff among the people had a craving, and soon they had the people of Israel whining. In other words, this certain group of people, they weren't happy, and they're whining and complaining, and it's just spreading like wildfire. Why can't we have meat? We ate fish in Egypt, and we got it for free. To say nothing of the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But nothing tastes good out here. All we get is manna, manna, manna. Wine, wine, wine. You see, at this point in Israel's history, again, they had been brought out of captivity. And they were being provided for in the desert or in the wilderness. And they were given manna to eat every single morning. They had to go out and they would gather it up and they would bring it back for the day and they would prepare it. But some of the things that would have also had to happen with this group out in the desert that God was providing for was He had to provide them with water. He had to provide them with all kinds of protection from animals and disease and all kinds of things. Scripture tells us He provided them with sandals that didn't wear out. And essentially, they were totally under God's care as they're traveling out in the wilderness, learning. Well, unfortunately for them and us sometimes, God has to take the stance of a harsh disciplinarian and bench us. And he does this in order to teach something, in order to change our hearts, in order for us to learn something sometimes. You see, God is constantly trying to redeem his people, and he's constantly trying to get us to trust in who he is. Trust him. Regardless of whether you like it or you don't like it or you agree with it, it doesn't make any difference. Even when being a harsh disciplinarian, though, what God does for people, for us, for them, he does out of love. And he does it for their benefit and for our benefit. And when God is being a harsh disciplinarian, he's not being cruel. He's actually being very accommodating and very loving. Now, this manna that he was providing for them was kind of a seed-like substance, and they would go out and they would gather it up, and some of the historical documents talk about how good it tasted when they would bake it with oil and things, which also would indicate they're out there wandering around. Where did the oil come from? Lots of things were being provided by God, all for their benefit, all because he knows what they need, and lovingly he was providing it. But they were dissatisfied. And some of the people started whining and complaining. And they wanted something different, or they wanted more. How many times do we get to that point in our own walk with God? To where we're dissatisfied, where we want more than what he's provided. So God tells the people, says, okay, get ready, let the party start. And he tells Moses, tell the people to consecrate yourselves. Get ready for tomorrow when you're going to eat meat. You've been whining to God. We want to eat meat. Give us meat. We had a better life in Egypt. God has heard your whining and he's going to give you meat. That's his response to Moses, and through Moses he tells the people. So God's going to answer their cry for meat. And he's going to do something in a very miraculous way. Does anybody remember the story? He sends quail. Anybody like quail? Ever had that? Huh? Oh, it's going to be a lot. You're going to eat meat, he says, and not just for a day that you'll eat meat, not for 2 days or 5 days or 10 or 20, but for a whole month. And you're going to eat meat until it's coming out of your nostrils. You're going to be so sick of meat that you'll throw up just at the mere mention of it. And here's why. Because you have rejected God and who is right here amongst you, whining to his face. Well, why did we ever have to leave Egypt? You see, the Israelites had started to become extremely disenchanted with God and God's provision for them. Again, it's a human tendency. Sometimes we just become disenchanted. We don't agree. We don't like it anymore. It's not what we expect. It's not where we think we should be heading. And as I look around the room, I can picture many of you who have probably felt that in your life. I don't like where this has gone. I don't like what you're allowing me to go through right now. I don't like what I see as a lack of provision in my life. Instead, I see the opposite. Well, the Israelites, of course, were disenchanted. They wanted more. But then the story keeps going, and then Moses starts to challenge God. You know, we always picture Moses as this guy that's leading the nation of Israel, and he's got such a strong connection with God. Well, he's not real happy about it either. And Moses said, okay, God, I'm standing here surrounded by 600,000 men on foot. And that does not include the women and children, of course, as well as the livestock. This is a massive group of people. You say I'll give them meat every day for a month? So where's it coming from? Even if all the flocks and their herds were butchered, would that be enough? Even if all the fish in the sea were caught, would that be enough? How many times in our lives does God respond and we continue to doubt and to challenge in what he says he's going to do? Think about it. Moses questions God about where's all this stuff going to come from? And really what Moses is doing is he's questioning God's ability. Same thing that we do sometimes too. I know your promises, God. I've read them and I've been studying it for years, but I don't see them unfolding in front of me. So how's this going to work? How are you going to rectify this particular situation? For me, God tells me in his word, I love all my people, all of my creation. He says, I love each and every one of you so much that I would die for you. And I'm like, yeah, I want everyone to be redeemed. How are you going to do that? We don't always understand how he's going to work in things in people's lives. But, in tough love, this harsh disciplinarian lets Moses know that he can handle it. And God answers Moses, so you don't think I can take care of you? You'll soon see whether what I say happens for you or not. Are there any bird watchers here? Bruce? Any other ones? Well, God responds here with the mother lode of all bird migrations. Absolutely the mother lode. Now a wind went out from the Lord and drove quail in from the sea. It scattered them up to 2 cubits deep all around the camp, as far as a day's walk in any direction. All that day and night, and all the next day, the people went out and gathered quail. No one gathered less than 10 homers, and they spread them out all around the camp. Now, let me put this in context for you. A cubit is about 1.5 feet. So that means, like John said, about 3 feet deep. That's a lot of quail, man. That's a lot of birds. Can you imagine what it must have smelled like? Huh? Hold the phone. And then it says that they were spread out as far as the eye could see. I mean, this is not just, and again, this was a camp of over 1 million people in the wilderness, being cared for by God. And this migration of birds coming in, and all as far as you could see was just 3 feet at the most. Some of it probably wasn't. This unbelievable, massive quantity of quail. Now, it also says that not any of them gathered less than 10 homers. Now, a homer is 10 bushels. So that means each person gathered about 40 bushels of birds. Okay? That's a lot of meat. That's a lot of plucking, or whatever you got to do to them to prepare them. And then God has to take the stance of a harsh disciplinarian. And again, I want you to remember he's doing this for their own good. He's doing this because as he's been caring for them, as he's led Israel out of Egypt, out of this oppression that they were living under, and he brings them out, and they started to fall away from him again, and they need some correction. And God, it gets to the point to where he's got to be kind of harsh with them, but he's not doing it to be vindictive. He's doing it to care for them. He's doing it lovingly. But while the meat was still in between their teeth, and before it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague. Therefore the place was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who had craved other food. You see, God inflicted them. Yeah, you want meat? Okay, here's meat. You're not happy with me? You don't think I can provide, Moses? Really? What, have you been looking around? And I've been feeding all these people and caring for all these, what? I mean, it gets to the point to where he's got to take a brick almost and knock you upside the head. You don't think I can do it? And he takes the stance of a harsh disciplinarian. But what I want you to see here also from this story is that the scripture tells us they buried the people there that were complaining against God. Now that seems harsh and it seems totally unfair, but many times in scripture, when we read stories like this, you have to understand the context and the reasoning. When your attitude, your complaining, and your disenchantment with God starts to affect somebody else's attitude and ability to come to know God, he takes that very seriously. When you start to draw other people away from God and from that saving relationship that he's trying to establish, God says, no, I'm not going to tolerate that. I'm not going to let you inflict and infect all of these other people that want to trust me and know me. And like I said, it seems very harsh. But again, if you look at it from the perspective of what God is doing here is simply redemption. If this whole orchestrated deal that we are living in, this life, and Jesus coming into the world, and the story of his birth, and all this stuff, is simply so that you and I have an opportunity to come to know God to the point where we can offer our life back to him and say, God, I want to know you. I want to follow you. I want to be yours for the rest of eternity. That's what he's doing. And he says, if your attitude or your disenchant with me gets in the way, I will tolerate that to a point. But when you start to draw other people away from me, I can't allow that. I can't. That's what this story is about. Just like Robert on the bench. The coach could not allow Robert's attitude and disenchantment, if you will, with the team, and because he felt he was so entitled and his whopper should be made the way he wanted it. God only allows these things so far.